Welcome everybody. This is probably our last review video for our memory unit. And before we begin, I want you to take a look at some of the objectives for our video. First, we want to be able to describe the difficulties in discerning true memories from false ones. We want to be able to discuss the reliability of children's eyewitness testimony. We want to be able to describe misinformation effect and source amnesia, are two big vocabulary terms in this section. Discuss the controversy of repressed and recovered memories of childhood sexual abuse, and be sure to include your notes and text pages as well as the video when you kind of summarize and review the information from this video. So let's get started on our notes. We are going to talk about memory construction today and the creation of inaccurate memories, and a couple of the terms that we're going to look at that I don't believe are in your textbook first in creating inaccurate memories. One of those terms is leveling, and many memories, especially episodic memories, experience this. Our episodic memories are somewhat simplified based on our selective attention and our experiences in this case. And what happens here with leveling is we tend to narrow down our memory details to the gist or the main points of an episodic memory. So if you think about telling someone about a 2-hour movie that you saw this last weekend that was great, how long does it take you to tell somebody about the movie? Well, leveling, the principle of leveling might suggest you just talk about the gist of it. It might get down to maybe 5 minutes or even less than 5 minutes to tell them about that movie. So the details are narrowed down. Sharpening is kind of the opposite effect. It occurs when our selective attention leads to an overemphasis of specific selected details. For example, if during a presidential debate, someone focuses on one candidate drinking water and counted about 32 times, and that's all they can recall about the debate. Not that somebody won or lost it, but how somebody drank a lot of water. So leveling and sharpening, you want to remember those terms. And as we move on, we're going to talk about some really famous studies here, and this is where misinformation effect comes into play. And this basically is misinformation that we incorporate into our memory after an event occurs. So this is likely to happen after an event, not during. We're just moving that a little bit here. I want to reposition this. Sorry, folks. Up here. Okay. So misinformation effect basically refers to subtle misinformation after an event has occurred actually is incorporated in as an actual memory. And very famous researcher Loftus, one of the big gurus of all memory research, shows two groups of students a film of a minor auto accident. And then after the accident, they quizzed each person in the group and said one of three things. The question was, how fast were the cars going when they either smashed into each other, hit each other, or contacted each other? And then after that suggestion, each student was asked to estimate how fast they think the cars were going. And if they used the word smashed, the estimate was higher, as you can see, than if it was hit each other or contacted each other. Now, the funny thing that happened about that is afterwards, a week later, they asked the subjects, did you see any broken glass? So 1 week later, they came back, did you see any broken glass? The answer was a definitive yes if the accident video was followed up with a statement of being smashed into each other. Now, there really was no broken glass. The original accident was the cars hit each other, but in the follow-up questioning, the subtle misinformation of smashed was incorporated into the memory of the accident, and they tended to misremembered and saw broken glass, which didn't actually occur. Now, when can misinformation effect happen? Well, we're all susceptible to it, and most of us can't tell the difference if an event that we remember is actually real or imagined, even though most of us think it's pretty real. It can happen, especially if we come over here, as time allows the memory to fade. So the longer the time goes by, the more likely misinformation effect is likely to occur. Who is most susceptible to misinformation effect? Younger children are more likely to be susceptible to misinformation. And what happens is the original memory pathway, the trace, is changed by the suggestions that happen afterwards, or the subtle information that occurs afterwards. And it's really likely that people do not notice the difference between the real and the suggested memory. Confidence, that's a big part here. And eyewitnesses may say they're absolutely certain that they saw what they saw, but research shows that confidence in the memory really has little correlation to its accuracy, especially as time goes by and increases from a day to a week to a month to a year. Now, there is some evidence that suggests that the brain actually knows what's going on, and in scans of the brain, the hippocampus, that we've spoken about quite a bit in this unit, is active during recall for real memories, but it is not accurate for fake or confabulated memories. And a confabulated memory is a false memory, an unintended false memory, kind of like a lie that isn't intended to be a lie. Nobody intended to come up with this memory, but it is a fake memory that is unintended but believed to be real. So we often confabulate our memories. So remember, once we receive this misleading information, and it can be subtle, a subtle suggestion, or like, did you see the man wearing glasses? Was the stop sign visible? And maybe there was nobody wearing glasses. Maybe it was a yield sign instead of a stop sign. But it's quite likely that that information can be incorporated, especially as time goes on. So remember, when we recall the information, which might be misinformation, and we repeat it and we recall it again, it may be encoded falsely as real. Now, I will upload this website for this eyewitness testimony video clip. It's about less than 2 minutes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So what we're basically saying here is the brain kind of has this sophisticated Photoshop capability, and we can kind of remake our memories pretty vividly, as a matter of fact. Some other studies, Richard Weissman, 1999, staged, I think it was 8 seances. Each one of them had 25 people. These seances were run by actually an actor, not a real magician or a person with real ESP, real clairvoyance. During the seance, the people had their eyes closed, their hands were closed, and the actor would say, good, good, focus on moving that table. Yes, we're doing it. Keep focusing. The table's risen a little bit. It actually moved. This is wonderful. And then 2 weeks later, asked about the experiences. Just about a third of the people actually said yes, they felt the table move. So it's likely that the misinformation or the source of the sensation of moving it was believed to be real, and this might be another example of confabulation, and the people actually believed it was happening. Source amnesia is another aspect that can cause our memories to be not fully real, also known as source misattribution, or attributing the wrong source to an experience. So you remember something but you might be remembering a conversation as opposed to a real experience. So in a study, Poole and Lindsay in 2002 had preschoolers visited by Mr. Science, and he did a lot of demonstrations, such as blowing up a balloon with baking soda and vinegar. 3 months later, post-test, the parents read to them some true stories, some false stories about the event. 4 out of 10 kids recalled doing things that actually didn't happen, such as, did Mr. Science do an experiment with ropes and pulleys? 40% of them said, yes, they did remember them. Now, imagine how this might affect spreading rumors, for example. Source misattribution or source amnesia. You hear a rumor, a couple days later, maybe that rumor was actually a real experience, and when it's retold, it gets exaggerated a little bit, and people are all upset that this event really happened. So even with rumors, we can experience these fundamental principles. So how can this affect eyewitness testimony, especially children? Can we trust children's eyewitness testimonies? Well, some famous studies. In 1993, Cece and Bruck, a couple other very famous, well-known researchers on eyewitness testimony, had 3-year-olds, with permission of parents, have physical examinations with pediatricians and a nurse, were later asked to show on dolls where the physicians had touched them, and 55% showed incorrectly that the doctors performed a genital exam, but they did not. So there was some false memories in that case. In another study, they were asked to pick a card and think really hard, had this happened to you? When they read the card, 10 weeks later, 55% or 58% had remembered parts or most of the parts in the card as real. For example, did you ever go to the hospital with a mousetrap on your finger? And one of the cards, some of them were real events, some of them were fake events, and 58% had misremembered some of the fake events as real, like the mousetrap on the hand, and because I remembered it hurt a lot. Loftus, in another study, had trusted adults share 3 real and a fake event with teenagers, and about a third of them later recalled the false as real, being lost in a moth, for example, and they remembered details, specific details about what had happened. In another study, preschoolers were led to believe they just overheard a remark about a visiting magician was missing a rabbit in their classroom. And then a couple weeks later, 78% of those preschool kids reported seeing the rabbit that didn't really exist in their own classroom. So another longitudinal test, 9th graders were interviewed about their attitudes and activities and experiences. 35 years later, they were asked to recall their experiences and their attitudes and their activities. Most reported attitudes that were similar to their current attitudes. So their 44-year-old attitudes. 30% remembered physical punishment that they had received as a child, even though 82% actually reported in the initial study that they had received physical punishment at home. So one researcher said, caterpillars become butterflies as adults, and it seems like those adults believe that in their youth they were actually little butterflies and not caterpillars. So can we trust children as eyewitnesses? And research tends to suggest yes, if they have not spoken with the adults involved in, for example, abuse prior to the interview, and their disclosure is made in the first interview with a neutral adult who is asking non-leading questions. So they can be effective if. And that's it, folks. I'm going to have to cut it off here quick because